Wonderful. All right. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I am really excited to be here with you all today for our Administration Management and Marketing panel. We have a fantastic group of panelists who are going to share lots of expertise. Even in our little pre-planning call, we were already getting into some of the things that future expats need to know. So I know that you're gonna get a lot of information out of this call. Just a little bit of housekeeping to get everyone started. If this is your first call, everyone is muted at the time, and we're going to leave the mics muted so that we can make sure and maximize time with our panelists and get all of their information here. But if you have questions, please, please, please send them. You can do so either by sending them in the chat, or you can use the little raise hand feature if you'd like for me to unmute your mic so you can ask your question directly. If you'd like to ask an anonymous questions, you've got two options for that. The first is that you all have the ability to rename yourselves in our attendee list right now. So if you'd like to, you could rename to yourself to something that allows you a little bit more anonymity so that you can ask those questions freely. The other option is semi-anonymously. You may send me a private message, and I'm happy to ask your question without revealing who asked that question. Please know that I will see who sent that question, so I will have your identity for that, but that information doesn't print on any of the chat logs or anything like that. On the screen, you'll also see a link right now. That's a bit.ly link, which means it's case sensitive, but if you go to that link, you'll find a Google Doc for each one of our panels. And on that Google Doc, there is the placeholder for where the recording will be once it's published. But most importantly, there's all of our panelists' contact information and resources that they have pulled together to share with you. So please check that out. And we will go ahead and get started with our fantastic panelists. So I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. And to get us started, if you could just share your name, your current title, and then what your background is in student affairs and higher education. So we'll just go in the order on the screen. So Josh, I'll ask you to get us started.
Absolutely. Good morning here on the East Coast. This is Josh Goldman. I am the President and CEO of Association Crossroads. After a 17-year career, primarily in associations and nonprofits, I started my own consulting business in January, and then a pandemic hit. So that was excellent planning on my part. My higher ed experience was graduate school at Bowling Green State University, where I was primarily focused on Greek life and the housing combination. So I was a live-in house director for Phi Mu sorority, and then had a programmatic assistantship in the Office of Residence Life. Over that 17-year career, I still consider myself, so I've been out for 17 years. So the day I graduated grad school, I was an expat, technically. I went into Phi Gamma Delta headquarters as their director of education. I still primarily saw myself as a student affairs professional working inside of an association. I then went into a CUOI, College University Housing Officers International. I would say about halfway through that job is when I mentally transitioned away from being a higher ed professional and to really be an association professional. And then I served in a couple of other associations, CPA societies. That was very interesting. One of my friends asked me the biggest difference between CPA societies and higher ed societies, and I said, well, they don't talk about feelings a lot. That's for sure. So that's my background, and thank you for having me here this morning.
Thanks, Josh. Go ahead, Scott.
Hi, good morning from Utah. My name is Scott Kirkessner, and I'm serving as the marketing manager for Intercap Lending. It's a home loan mortgage company based in Utah that has branches in Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, and licensed in about 42 other states in the country. And my higher ed experience is primarily in admissions recruitment and mostly specifically in recruitment events and campus tours. I spent the better part of 10 years between the University of Arizona and the University of Utah managing campus tours, recruitment events, programs, open houses, and then student ambassadors. And so I had the opportunity to work with, I think, over 300 different student ambassadors in my career time. And kind of like Josh, I mentally transitioned out at a certain point, but I kind of pushed myself through maybe 3 more years of higher ed until I realized, like, at 3 years ago when that mental transition happened was when I really kind of started to burn out. So that's kind of when it became time to find a new role. I've answered the whole last straw question in our expat group a couple different times. I'm sure a lot of you may have seen that experience there. And just based out of necessity to stay in Utah is the need to find a new career. And just kind of went forward from there. And so been out of higher ed and student affairs for the last little over 2 years now.
Thank you, Scott. And Scott, thank you again for joining us so early. I know in your time zone, this is quite an early morning for you, so I appreciate it. All right, Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel Schraeder. I'm a financial professional with Equitable Advisors. Equitable just had a name change in January. Before that, we were AXA Advisors. So you may have heard of us, you may not have. We've got 48 branches in the United States, but I'm based out of Springfield, Illinois. I spent 14 years in higher education professionally before becoming an expat, specifically in residence life. I was a residential learning coordinator at Valparaiso University. I went on to Wright State in Dayton, Ohio, where I was the assistant director for residence life, and then moved to Springfield, Illinois to become the assistant director for residence life here. Given some restructuring, I was looking to stay in Springfield and looking for some new opportunities. So that's what led me ultimately to this role.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. And Neil, you can close us out here.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Stanglein. I serve as the Director of Development for the Delta Zeta Foundation. I spent about almost 8 years in higher education, primarily working with fraternities and sororities, student organizations, leadership development, programming at 2 different institutions, one in the Midwest and then one out in Virginia. And I have been an expat since March of 2014, where I have spent my time since leaving a campus has been in fraternity and sorority fundraising specifically for a number of different groups and organizations, and probably remember starting to realize my time in higher education was coming to an end. The shelf life was expiring somewhere around 2013, just lots of leadership changes, lots of institutional politics happening around me, and did not really see anything that there was going to be a light at the end of the tunnel for those changes. And so just kind of decided to start looking elsewhere. So have definitely enjoyed my time being higher ed adjacent, as I like to call it, doing fundraising for organizations that are still on campuses, but not being on a campus.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again all for joining us. And we're going to go ahead and jump into our first question. So the question is, tell us a little bit more about your current responsibilities and then what specific skills you brought over from your student affairs higher education background. What were those transferable skills that allow you to fulfill these responsibilities that you have? So Scott, I'm going to let you answer this question first.
Okay. Intercap Lending has me as their principal graphic designer and their brand manager, and I also oversee their CRM software system. And then I also am one of the field liaison folks. So the requests come into a centralized database, and I work with the loan officers to understand what they're requesting and then parse that out to our different designers or videographers on the team. So coming over from higher ed, I had the opportunity to have a lot of responsibility with our CRM system at the University of Arizona, which also happened to be the same system at the University of Utah. What was fortunate for me was when it first came to the University of Arizona, we were all trained as super users. So we were all responsible for doing different campaigns, emails, and everything like that. Toward the end of my time at U of A, they started to put in their own admissions marketing team who started taking that over. But I had been on for so long, in the system for so long, it made more sense to let me keep doing what I'm doing instead of turn that over to the marketing team. So then when I moved over to Utah and the same CRM system was there, that was kind of part of the understanding when I was hired, was that I would be managing filters, campaigns, everything myself instead of that team. So that strong CRM experience was probably like the #2 bullet point on my resume, because I mentioned in our higher ed group a couple times that I just flipped my resume completely because all these different tertiary duties, other duties as assigned, random stuff you just get assigned in your role. One thing that was handed to me was to do kind of a graphic redesign of our presentations at Arizona. And then when I got to Utah and I saw what they were doing, and I just took that upon myself to, again, do a graphic redesign. So those are kind of some of the things I brought over. And then just project management, me being a professional event planner kind of helps because I know how to prioritize different requests. I know how long certain things will take me. I know how to respond to timelines and things like that. So those are a good handful of those things that have come over. And then I don't have as much management or leadership experience as I did in higher ed, which part of me is kind of thankful for. But having that leadership experience has helped because there are people in the field, other graphic designers, who kind of have a dotted line to me because it's important to make sure everything looks consistent across the company. But I kind of take it a little bit further and I allow each person to have their own spin, their own flair. There's just only a few elements that are needed to make sure something is on our brand, and then giving those people that kind of flexibility. And that was kind of my leadership style when I was supervising tour guides and professional staff as well, is to have them understand the expectations, but allow them to take things a little bit more, just to be less rigid among people who you're mentoring or training, and kind of letting them put their spin on things too while playing within the rules.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. That's really helpful. Daniel, how about you?
Sure. Yeah, we've got 3 functions that we predominantly do as financial professionals. Number one, advice giving. So looking at individuals' portfolios, making recommendations about what types of funds they might consider investing in. Protection strategies, so looking at long-term care or life insurance needs, and looking then lastly at retirement strategies. And retirement strategies is probably the biggest focus for me in my role with Equitable. And the reason for that is we do a lot of group plans. So you may have TIAA, CREF, or Fidelity or something like that on your campus. We go out and meet with individuals on their campuses and help them understand their retirement benefits. The focus for our role is universities, schools, healthcare facilities, non-for-profits. So really helping with their 403B or 457 retirement plan and understanding their investment options. And that's what introduces us to be able to be a full financial advisor for them. So from some of those transferable skills is that we are our own business. Each of us as individuals within our office function together as a team, but individually we are our own business. And so I get to make all of the decisions as far as how do I spend my day? How am I going to prioritize my clients? What type of marketing am I going to do to support my brand within the Equitable brand so that I'm able to be knowledgeable and out in front in the community to be able to support teachers and non-for-profits where they're at to understand their individualized backgrounds. Additionally, we've got some management roles in our office, and I'm on the leadership track, given that most individuals enter as a financial professional straight out of college, having a number of years outside of the field and having professional staff supervision experience was attractive to Equitable Advisors to be able to step in and say, once you've learned the business, we may tap you to bring other new students, and having that higher connection, since they are looking predominantly for college graduates, gives you a shoe-in to be able to be connected back to your previous career development areas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, Neil.
All right. So as the director of development, I take care of all of the non-forward facing fundraising opportunities for the Delta Zeta Foundation. So I work with our comprehensive annual giving program. So working with 6 to 7 mailings per year at about 10 to 15,000 pieces of mail each one. So the writing, the editing, the production, and we work with some vendors and partners there. I work with our Day of Giving. So for those of you that have seen the Days of Giving done by institutions and pretty much everybody at this point, I'm working on that behind the scenes, making sure that goes smoothly and we raise the most money that we can in 24 to 48 hours. We also do an on-site phone-a-thon. So if you're familiar with your call centers or anything at the university level that you have students calling, we do that for about 1 week at a designated chapter at one of our chapters across the US. And so I coordinate those efforts as well. And so, and then also, I also kind of do some behind the scenes project management, and just to kind of make sure the annual fund and our foundation is getting the information and things that we need. Transferable skills, I think the biggest one for me is relationship building. That is something that we are phenomenal at as student affairs professionals. That is something that we are doing every day, building relationships with students, student leaders, administration, faculty, staff, whomever. And that, I think, is what made me successful as a student affairs professional, was to be able to build those relationships. And that is basically what fundraising is relationship building to its fullest extent. I need you to trust me. I need you to feel confident, and then I'm going to ask you for money. And so I think that's where our skill, where it's very similar. Obviously, we're not asking people for money in student affairs all the time, but that same relationship building that trust, and making those connections is, I think, definitely the biggest transferable skill that I have brought over, and where it's the most similar.
Great, thank you. And this has been something that I've seen through all of the different industry panels that we've had so far, is that ability to connect with people and to speak with literally anyone. Be able to communicate is something that people find that when they go into these other industries, we're used to as student affairs professionals being able to talk, and our colleagues being able to talk to folks, but it's really something that will help you elevate, amongst your peers when you move on. All right, Josh, we'll have you close us out on this question.
Yeah, sounds good. I think, associations, I'll speak more about associations in general than my current job of running my own consulting company, where I specialize in curriculum management and market assessment for associations that want to create new educational products or programs. And I also specialize in credentialing, so certificates, certification, those kinds of programs. But I'll talk more broadly about associations, and associations really, to me, are almost a microcosm of higher ed. All the functional components inside of an association, you will likely find some transferable component of that from higher education. So if you think about program planning, curriculum design, project management, event contracting, supervision of interim staff, part-time staff, full-time professionals, budgeting, managing and creating a budget, in associations and sales and other organizations, they use CRMs or constituent relationship management systems. Associations use association management systems. It's very similar to a student record system or information management system that you find in higher education. In associations, we recruit members throughout higher ed. We're either recruiting students to the institution or trying to engage them in some type of program or activity that we have functional responsibility for in the higher ed space, so that transfers over. Moving away from the functional to more what I would call the softer side, associations and nonprofits tend to have diffuse and ambiguous decision-making processes. So you have to be able to kind of tease your way through that and understand both the political, the socioeconomic, the environmental, all those other things that mix into this really fuzzy environment. And if that doesn't describe higher education decision-making, I don't know what does. So I've seen colleagues on the nonprofit side struggle a little bit with that diffuse process, because there's not a policy, there's not a X way to do something, and we tend to be well equipped to deal with ambiguity and stressors on the systems. You'll find if you're interviewing for association or not-for-profit jobs, one of the best things I can tell you to think about and really ask questions around is how decisions are made. So some of those nonprofits are very staff-driven, and some of those nonprofits are very volunteer-driven, and you'll find pros and cons to each of those. And you'd also find that in higher ed, right? You have some that have really stringent decision-making processes, and others that are more diffuse and ambiguous. Other translatable and transferable skills and I think priorities in association associations in higher ed right now. Obviously, DEI and diversity and inclusion initiatives, nonprofits and associations are finally, waking up to that need, and they realize they don't have that expertise. So the number of job postings for that type of expertise has been increasing pretty dramatically. I think people don't realize that associations also often have student components, whether they're higher ed focused and facing, or whether they're more industry facing like the CPAs. There's some student component of that, and that can be attractive to higher ed professionals. What we're not always used to in higher ed is thinking about revenue and profit and loss. So most higher ed professionals that move into, well, I won't say most, the ones that I know that move from higher ed into associations often ended up taking revenue generating types of positions. And that's a very different view. So it took me, a little while to adjust to the business side of nonprofits and associations. Whereas in higher ed, we were used to expense management and obviously making good fiscal decisions, but thinking about it from a revenue generating perspective as well was a bit of a transition.
Awesome, thank you. That's so helpful. I appreciate all of your answers, very comprehensive. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about when you made that transition. What was the first year on the job like, and where did you acknowledge or identify that there were skills gaps, and how did you address those skills gaps? So we'll start with Daniel for this question.
Great. Yeah, for me, I did not have a background in finance beyond the budget management that you get in higher education. And so to move into a financial role was something that I was pretty nervous about. And I acknowledged with my interviewer. And so to be able to set, ultimately what they shared is that they have enough people on the team that are knowledgeable about the products and services that we offer. What they can't build are individuals who are dedicated to building relationships in the same way that we are in student affairs. So as both Neil and Josh mentioned, one of the key components of my job is identifying needs and issues that arise that clients have brought to us that they may not be able to verbalize. And so as a student affairs professional, that's something that you deal with every day when you notice a student in trauma, is trying to determine what issues they are experiencing themselves, helping them name those issues, and then ultimately decide to address them. And so the first couple months on the job are really dedicated to getting your licenses. We are a licensed industry. We're overseen by the SEC. And so there's testing that's associated with that, but there's also a lot of mentorship that takes place within the individual office to be able to have a work partner that does the bulk of the work. You do the introductions and the follow through, but they're able to help identify what products and services make the most sense once we're able to identify a need.
Great, thank you. That's reassuring for folks who are also thinking they're missing a capacity there, so that's great. Neil, what's your experience been?
I think the first year in fundraising was definitely a learning curve. Really trying to rack my brain on what that felt like. I think where I was successful is, as student affairs professionals, we're educators first, and so I think we're taught how to ask questions and how to admit when you don't know something or to look for those resources. And so I think I really leaned on that vulnerability of just saying, I don't know what I don't know. And I was working remote for a company. I was in Richmond, Virginia, and they were in Dallas. And so there was a handful of remote people. So that presented its own challenges. My first remote job and things. But I think it was just asking a lot of questions. For me, some of the lingo and the terminology was the same. I was fundraising for fraternities and sororities, and I knew obviously a lot about them, but not in that context. And so I had to switch, just kind of I had to learn fundraising, and I had to learn the basics of an entire new career and new area. But I think really relying on those skills that we teach our students is to ask questions, learn, soak it up, take advantage of every free professional development webinar opportunity that you can, and just, be a sponge and just ask a lot of questions. Because I would say from my own perspective, they brought me on because of my relationship with fraternities and sororities and higher education and that connection. And so I would say, at least in my experience, they knew what they were getting. And so they knew they were going to have to teach me to be a fundraiser, but they knew they weren't going to have to worry about me building relationships and building those connections with people. And so I would like to think that as we decide to leave student affairs, companies or individuals know what they're getting and know that we're going to have a skill set that a lot of people don't have, and so they're not going to have to worry about that, so they can focus on other things. And I would hope that they're kind of ready to take that on with you, to know we're going to have to teach you these things, but you're going to bring this, and it'll kind of balance out.
That's great. Thanks, Neil. And I think an important thing to keep in mind too is that you want an organization that wants you to experience growth. Because if they're bringing on someone who's already done everything that they're looking for, there's probably not going to be a lot of motivation for you to continue to grow and succeed and, excel. And so hopefully there's an opportunity either in your materials or in an interview for you to have a conversation about what growth this opportunity brings for you and how that translates to wins for them. Awesome. Okay, Josh.
My transition was relatively early. So I graduated grad school and then went into my first full-time job in an adjacent, higher ed adjacent position with a fraternity, and then went into another higher ed role, and then really branched out into the non-higher ed associations. I think the adjustment to the business culture, which you to a degree are shielded from in graduate school, or maybe some of the early years in higher ed administration and management. I commented that the big difference is you don't talk about feelings a lot, and even in nonprofits, which are very charity oriented and people and advancement oriented, those boards of directors are often from significant companies and industries in the area. You're going to be asked questions about value, about decision-making processes. And so I think that was an adjustment for me. There was not a lot of fluff as you leave the higher ed space and move into more of an actual company corporate environment. And so you really have to sharpen the way you talk about the work that you do so that they understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to achieve. You're just using different language, because the nomenclature from higher ed and student affairs is night and day from the business world.
Great. Thank you so much for that feedback. All right. So Scott, can you close us out on this one?
Yeah. My first year was really interesting because I switched into a role that you could classify as entry level. It was interesting because while that it's a role where there is a lot of room for growth and room for opportunity, I still, and I mentioned this in our Facebook group too, there's still about a good amount of imposter syndrome for me that first year, mainly because I had switched from running my own team, running events, kind of being the last word on so many things for almost 10 years. And to switch into what is only like my tertiary and other duties as assigned roles was really jarring. It was interesting because the person who hired me while she was like the field marketing manager, like her marketing role was solely just relationship building between loan officers and real estate agents and builders. She didn't have any design or creative experience. So it really kind of rested on me and then one other designer to figure things out. Neil brought up a good point about, we're trained to ask questions and stuff like that. I asked nothing. I was just so nervous going into this role. I just self-taught myself the design software quietly as much as I could, and would Google stuff on my phone, like how to move this over and stuff like that, because prior to coming over, since I never had access to the good design software, I'm designing in Publisher and PowerPoint and stuff like that. You just got to use what's at your advantage until you can get into a role that's going to pay for your Adobe suite. And then I just self-taught myself from that point on. And then 3 months into the job, our regional manager, we get moved over to a new regional manager. He brings in a business development person and he gets rid of nearly everybody on the team except for me and the other designer. And then she immediately retreats to FMLA because she's had major disagreements with him before. So it was just him and I had just such intimate FaceTime with him really kind of showing me best practices. He trusted my design experience, so he took it upon himself to craft my messaging experience. And that's really what took it, kept taking things out for me. So that first year, there was a lot of imposter syndrome, maybe the first 3 months, maybe even the first 6 months, to be honest. Because even working under him, I was eager to learn under him and work under him, but I know that I just can't. I know he didn't read my resume or my background, so he doesn't know where I came from, what I've been doing, but he seems happy with what I'm doing. And since he got rid of 3/4 of the whole team, and now the remaining quarter, he put his energy into developing me, which was great. And he left that role to move into the branch level to eventually become his own branch manager. And then that left kind of a leadership gap. So our regional director promoted me into that role. And that's when things started getting better, because now I'm back in relationship building and management, because not only am I going to be doing design and creative, but I'm also now in the field with branch managers and loan officers and real estate agents and builders, kind of bridging those relationships and stuff. So it's a matter of getting through just that one year, those first 6 to 9 months before this opportunity arose. And then that is where the rest of my higher ed experience really kicked in. And I only enjoyed that role only for 2 months, because then Intercap recruited me from my prior role at Academy Mortgage. And the person who recruited me was that boss who got recruited by Intercap a couple months ahead of me. So he knew what he wanted to do and accomplish. So he brought me over with him. And then brought our videographer too. So now the 3 of us like make up half of the marketing team, and there's 3 other people on the team. And things are going great now, but it was just one of those years. And then I don't know if it's like this for everybody else, but working in higher ed for so long, especially depending on your institution, University of Arizona has professional staff on contracts, meaning you really can't be terminated or laid off until like your contract is up. Utah didn't really have that, but you go through higher ed hearing these things where the corporate world is so cutthroat that they can just fire you for any reason. So that's again one of those things where it's just, I just wanted to make sure I didn't fall victim to any kind of like corporate culture where if they didn't like this one design, they're going to kick me out or something like that. So I don't know, it may have been an extreme situation for me. But if you have that imposter syndrome in a new role, it's okay. It's just a matter of, I think, being comfortable asking questions. So I echo Neil on that one. I don't think you should kind of internalize it like I did. And then just kind of go from there.
That's great. That's a wonderful perspective, because I think so many people do have fear of both the lack of job security perhaps and the imposter syndrome. And I think your strategy of Googling it and figuring it out, I think is effective, because if you get to a point where you can't figure it out, I think it's helpful to bring to someone saying like, this is what I've attempted to do on my own, and I'm still not finding the answer, but that shows a level of determination there. So that's great. Okay, so I want to do I know some of you have been out of the student affairs realm for quite a while, but I want to do a very student affairs thing right now and do our happies and crappies, our highs and lows, our rosebuds and rose thorns. What is the very best part of your current role, and what is the worst part of your current role? And Neil, we'll have you kick us off with this one.
Okay, the best part of my role is the organization that I get to work for and the people that I'm doing it with. As you all can see my resume in the Dropbox or in Google Drive. I took the roundabout way to get where I'm going. And so definitely loving the student affairs reflection and knowing that kind of, it took me a little bit to get where I'm at. So I'm very appreciative of the leadership of our organization, the leadership of our staff, and the ability to be able to do good work for a good organization. I had a number of fundraising jobs, and as you can kind of do the math that I was out of student affairs for 6 years, and I'm on my 4th fundraising job, you can kind of infer what you need to infer correctly on that adventure. And so it just, the people and the money, the people that I get to work with and volunteer with to raise money for outstanding programs and experiences for undergraduate women and graduate and alumni is what I love the best about my job. The worst part, I would say, is fundraising is a lot of data, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of manipulation of things. I was a journalism major. I stopped math at like statistics in college, and ran the other way anytime there was any other classes that needed and would find a workaround. And so the data and challenging myself pretty much on a regular basis to think more scientifically. There is a science to fundraising. For those of you that do choose to give to organizations, which I hope you all do, maybe back to your alma mater or organizations that are near and dear to your heart. I'm a fundraiser, I have to plug that. There's a science to why you're getting asked. There's a reason you're getting a specific mailing. There's a reason you're seeing certain Facebook posts, and maybe it's just a postcard this time, but then you're gonna get another piece of mail later on. There's a science to that. And I am just not a scientific minded person. And so really, I would say in the last 2.5 years at Delta Zeta, being able to hone in on those experiences. So while it is a challenge, I'm getting better at it and have taken the necessary professional development opportunities to do that. But that's just not where my brain goes. I'm ready to write. I'm ready to talk to you. I'm ready to tell you all the good things that Delta Zeta is doing, but ask me to dive into a spreadsheet with 140,000 names on it with giving histories and numbers. That's not my happy place. And I think I know that that's going to be a necessary evil, and I know that I'm going to eventually unravel that. And it's like pieces of a puzzle. I also don't like putting puzzles together, so that's also not really good for me. But that's where my answers are in fundraising, and so I'm just going to have to deal with that. And that's just something that is going to I just need to figure out how to make that work. And so but I also figure like if that's the worst thing about my job right now, then I'm in a good place because I have the support network to ask questions and ask for feedback regarding that area. So if that's the worst thing, then I think I'm doing okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Josh, what are your highs and lows?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about working for myself now that I've been owning my own company since January, and it is the best. I mean, the absolute best and the absolute worst at the exact same time. I think, as Daniel said, you decide your own day, how you're going to approach things, what clients you're really excited about, what projects you're really interested in taking. But at the end of the day, what I like to say is you have to kill it and grill it yourself. So, my income is based on my activities there. So with great, what is it, Spider-Man? With great, responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. That weight is always kind of there, especially as a new business owner, only 6 months into this. I'm still enjoying it. I'm not starving to death. I saved up my money and made sure that things were going to, go well. What I found, and I think I would have found this had I stayed in higher ed longer, but what I found working inside of associations and non-for-profits, at some point, I wasn't excited about the mission that we were doing, right? The work that I was doing, I was good at what I was doing, and the work that we were doing was important, but I found out that I'm much more mission driven, and I needed to get back to doing something that was really related to direct impact on an organization or on people. So I think, that was an observation of both a high and a low point, that I had more to give, and I wanted to give that in a different kind of way, and ended up in the self-employed realm.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. Thank you so much for that, Josh. And Josh, I also just realized that you've got the Friends background in your, I was like, it's interesting that he has a foosball table in his kitchen, but I'm there now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of virtual backgrounds. It's my flair.
I love it. Thank you.
When people ask me, how's my day going? I'm like, it's fine. It's fine.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Josh. Scott, what are your highs and lows?
This is my virtual background of choice.
The office.
Yeah. Goodness, highs have to be the company that I work for, Intercap Lending. I have never met a more active and caring leadership team. Like when this pandemic was first happening, there were a lot of nerves about what's going to happen to the housing market, and then how is Intercap going to respond if the housing market goes sideways. And fortunately, we were fine. But it's one of those things where it's like you just have this leadership team that is really, really caring and really looks out for their employees. And they reward their employees greatly, which is amazing. You just never see that outside. You just never see that in general in higher education in a lot of different cases. This is another favorite thing that I bring up in our expat panel, is that while we are part of a team, there's none of this BS that you have to watch your I statements, that you are no longer an individual anymore, and all, like, we win as a team and we lose as a team, and all the achievements are the team's achievements and stuff. Now, we're very intentional when we send a project to a loan officer. We say this is a piece that the team has designed. We do that because we don't want a loan officer getting used to a certain team member designing for them and then approaching that person directly, or saying, well, Scott didn't design this, I want him to do this, and then that's just a waste of time on the other designer's part. So we do that intentionally, but it's still known who has accomplished what among our executive team, among our own team, our supervisors, things like that. I think the most challenging part, though, is revisions. And anyone who works in marketing design is used to this, but sometimes you hit a home run and your design is good to go. And sometimes you have to do many, many different revisions. And sometimes they're very little revisions, and sometimes they decide they don't like the revision and they want you to go back to it and stuff. And that's where I have learned to save different versions of my design files instead of just overwriting it, because then one case they wanted me to roll back, and I'm like, well, I don't have that anymore. So I had to recreate it from through the PDF file. And so I think that's the challenging piece, is the revisions and stuff. The other challenging piece too is we're still riding out that housing bubble from 10 years ago. At any minute, housing can just go a completely different direction. And I think that's a challenging part just for me, because it's one of those things where if this happens, when things like this happen, like, what's the first department most struggling businesses cut? And so that's one of the things where if housing does go bad, then I need to figure out what to do in case they decide to slim down or cut the marketing department. But that goes back again to the leadership, just circling back to the best part of our leadership. Like when this first started happening, everyone kept saying Intercap is well capitalized against this. I don't know what well capitalized means, but they kept repeating it enough to where all of us felt good that even if we met some kind of market correction during the pandemic, that we may not be in as much trouble as other places were in 2008. So those are kind of like the two rosy and cloudy parts of the role. And I think the whole redesign revisions is common among anyone who works in marketing design. And it's just one of those things that you just roll with. And what works for me is as you just design more and more, you get to know these people's likes and dislikes and what they're looking for. And as long as it's not for like an outside real estate agent or a builder, it becomes easier to have your first draft accepted upon request.
Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. I'll have you close us out on this one, Daniel.
Great. Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Josh said about being a small business owner or being your own employer. For me, the most exciting piece is that I get to choose and make those decisions for what my day is going to look like, what I think is going to bring success, or what I've identified as success for that day, that week, or that month. That I'm in control of that, and I get to put in as much time or as little time as I need to do that. On the flip side, one of the things that I would say, moving from a salaried position to a largely commissioned-based position has been one of the things that I don't know that I would say that I don't like, but it definitely it adds a unique wrinkle to it. A lot of times the work that I've done, because it just feels like work and it's the right thing to do, I don't feel like I've earned the commission that I've gotten for the plan that we've laid out for clients. That being able to feel worthy and that not only am I doing the right thing for the client, but it's rewarded me for doing that work and the legwork. Particularly when it's a big client or a big case gets closed and it's a big payday. If I haven't put in much time into that, for me, that means I need to stay with those clients and give back even more time on the back end because of what I've earned as a result of the initial conversations.
Dana, I'm going to jump in on that one. That's absolutely true. And the shift made moving from higher ed into associations and then self-employment. This concept of time equals value just does not play out as equally in the corporate space or owning your own business. And you know, examples that I have, you know, I help clients with multi-million-dollar projects. And if that happens to only take me 40 hours of work, but we're providing hundreds of thousands of dollars of value, you know, there's a real opportunity to be fulfilled in heart and spirit, but also be financially secure at the same time.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. And I think that that is a nice segue into, I want to kind of transition to your process and decision of getting into your roles that you have. So I'm going to throw a bunch of questions out there, and whatever sticks, that's what I'd like for you to, you know, feel comfortable to talk about. But I just am kind of curious, like, what was your job search like? How did you narrow your search into this field? Where did you look for jobs? What did you have to do? You know, Scott, you've already touched on this. So what did you have to do to your resume to make it appropriate for those jobs? What was the interview process like? Again, those are a lot of questions. Feel free to speak to whatever you think that you know, can contribute in this, but advice for people who are wanting to move into this space. And Josh, we'll start with you for this question.
Thank you for starting with me. Let me let me jump in the middle, and eventually it'll hopefully start to make sense to me and you both. I think much like higher ed, you don't like grow up wanting to be an association professional. You know, most people don't even know that it exists. And I remember the moment that I decided campus work was not going to be for me, and that moment was at ACPA's. I can't remember what we called it then. You know, the cattle call for employment. It's called the placement exchange now. But I remember being in my hotel room and literally having like a mental breakdown. I don't want to work in this field. I'm never going to find a job. Everything I've been doing for 2 years, I've just realized I don't want to be doing anymore. And so I left that without any kind of hopes of a position, right? And I'm like crushed. And then just dumb luck, I was a member of Phi Gamma Delta, and they had a job that opened up that was perfect for me. And I just stumbled into that. Now progressing from there was much more intentional. I knew that I wanted to have a broad experience in non-for-profits and associations, so I began to look for roles potentially that offered those kinds of experiences, volunteering for the national organizations or the ASAE, which is the American Society of Association Executives, like the Association for Associations, Almeda, looking for thought leadership opportunities, presenting opportunities, volunteer opportunities, and then before long, just like higher ed, nonprofits and associations is a small community. And before long, I was getting, requested to consider working on projects or possibly applying for these jobs or these positions. And that became, a little bit easier on the career progression and transitions. So I kind of fell into it after a minor, mental breakdown at ACPA, and then really never looked back from there. Jeannie, is there anything, that we've talked about that you wanted me to touch on there? You think that got it?
I think that's great, and we'll let the other panelists kind of add to it, and then we can always take questions too if folks have more. But I think that your perspective is really, really valuable, because I'm guessing that there are folks who are either on this call right now or who will watch the playback later who are in their master's programs right now or have just finished them and are struggling either because they don't know if this field is right for them, or because they would love to be in this field, but because of the current COVID-19 situation in higher education, won't be able to initially start their journeys in here. So I think that your perspective is so valuable to say, like, you can fall into something even if it's not what you intended to, and still find a path that is much more prosperous for you. So that's great. Thank you.
And I continued to, even after working in the National Association, I did look at higher ed positions throughout, but just, never found anything that was really speaking to me.
Great. Thanks. Scott, let's move on to your perspective.
Yeah. I had mentioned the 2 last straw threads in our expat group. I encourage you guys to look those up, because I'm not going to get into my last straw story here, but I've been removed from higher ed now for 3 years. I said 2 years early. It's actually 3. It's been just a blur, honestly. When the time came to do a search, at first, I started looking for other higher ed roles in Utah, and then decided that because I needed to stay in Utah, I had to think about what else I can do. So now I'm a photographer, so I started looking for photography jobs, and then I started looking for PR jobs. Those are things that I kind of done the most in my previous roles with Utah and Arizona. And so I just started running searches on Indeed, and Indeed has a salary tracker. And I knew it's like, well, I want to make sure I'm making the same amount of money in this new job. So I, started doing these keyword searches like public relations with my salary, photography with my salary. And then, I think it was my girlfriend at the time started helping me do some searches, and she started running searches for marketing and design and things like that. And then that's when it clicked to me that I can flip my job and start focusing on the design and layout and graphic aspects on it. As tiny and as minimal and as little time they took as part of my day-to-day role, that's kind of when I started getting serious a bit. So I found a handful of marketing roles that I applied for, had a couple of interviews. It was the one interview at Academy Mortgage, which is what got me started. And she asked me questions about different marketing strategies. She asked me about my experience with CRM, things like that. But as I mentioned, since she didn't have a lot of creative design experience, she had another marketing manager from a branch actually kind of vet me. So she set up almost like a secondary interview with him. And then he was asking me some more questions about design and layout. And I was lucky he did not ask me about the actual software, which kind of goes to show, if you want to get into marketing design, the most important part is not knowing the software. The most important part is knowing composition and layout. That's the big thing, is knowing just what looks good and what doesn't look good. You can work from there. Maddy in the chat just asked about, I'm sorry if I outed you because you did put in private message, but you just asked about different resources, things like that. There is, I think it's Mashable has some kind of giant Adobe training program that they claim is $1,500, but it's perpetually on sale for $30. And I bought it. And so I bought that during the COVID because we had some downtime. So I wanted to kind of learn some more stuff about Adobe. But in my early days at Academy, I YouTubed so much stuff about different tricks in Photoshop, different tricks in Illustrator and InDesign. You don't have to pay to learn any of this. All of this is available on YouTube. I mean, I just watched a YouTube training a week ago on how to create a neon effect. So we have a neon version of our logo, which looks really, really cool. And so you don't have to pay for this stuff to learn these skills. you can, if you don't have the opportunity for on-the-job training like me, because I didn't, that's where all these videos on YouTube can really take shape and really assist you in getting those things figured out. I didn't have an opportunity to ask questions. I didn't have a good relationship with the other marketing designer on our team, and that's evidence when the new guy came and she left. That was pretty clear where that problem lied. So it's just a matter of just kind of being confident in your skills and what you want to do, because marketing takes so many different roles. There's design, but then there's also relationship building and management. There are marketing people who just work in CRM systems and nothing else. So that's always the big thing I tell people is, like, if you are thinking of marketing, well, my first question is, well, what? Design, photography, relationship building, CRM, what do you want to do in that first? And then kind of develop your skills from there. But we all have translatable skills. That's the best part, is we all have translatable skills. Higher ed thrives on other duties as assigned. And that's probably how all of us got into our new and modified expat roles, because of those. So those of you who are still in higher ed and student affairs, don't be afraid to take on other duties as assigned, because it could be something you're actually really great at and that could lead to your next career step.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Daniel, what recommendations do you have about your search?
I would say use your network is the biggest piece of recommendation that I would give. Donald Walker, who's also a member of this group, and I had crossed paths at a couple of conferences, and I reached out to him at one point in time in my career search, and I was like, I don't think I want to do student affairs anymore. I need to talk to somebody who's legitimately left the field. And so to reach out to individuals that you know, or that are a couple of degrees of separation away, will be really helpful. Trust your friends and family. The day that I decided I was leaving the field, I had specifically said I don't want to sell life insurance. Like, I don't know what I want to do, but I definitely don't want to sell life insurance. And my friends were like, I think you'd be really good at that. But part of it was because I had a preconceived notion of what selling life insurance looked like, based on what the media tells you. So if you think about the movies you've seen and what you're told about your current role, if you listen to quote unquote society tells you it's all about, it's very starkly different than what your day-to-day is. So ask questions, lean into your resources, and see who knows different individuals in your field. I got my job by one of the wives on the soccer team that I'm on introduced me to her husband and said, based on what you do for a living and what you've done in the past, I think you'd be really good in this role. You need to go talk to my husband. So it's all about getting introduced to new people and finding what your passion is, but also having individuals around you help you see what you don't see in yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Neil, you can close us out on this one.
Absolutely. Yes to everything the other gentlemen have already shared. I think for me, the hardest part was just admitting that I wanted to leave student affairs, a profession that I had put literal blood, sweat, and tears into. That hurdle, my first biggest hurdle was admitting it's time to go. And then really just trying to figure out what I was good at, what I wanted to do, or what I even wanted to try to sell myself as. And, you know, kind of like Daniel shared, people were like, you know, alumni, fundraising, like, you are a people person and you are a connector. And so I think listen to those around you that where, you know, sometimes they see us better than we see ourselves. And so if they're telling you that you'd probably be good at something, that could be definitely an area to explore. I cannot say enough about utilizing your network, and really it's all about who you know. My very first job in fundraising, the job description came from a connection who I now work with at Delta Zeta, but we were just connections in higher ed before that. She was the one who sent me the job description, and she was like, I don't really have much more information, but based on what you're telling me, I think this fits into your wheelhouse. And that then the snowball effect. And then each job I've had in fundraising after that first one has come from people I've known. Some of the positions haven't been posted, but continuing to utilize that network, have those conversations. That's how I ended up moving to Indianapolis from Atlanta, by just having a conversation of like, I'm not really happy in this role and I'm ready to leave. And then it was just, again, somebody was like, well, here, this position's open, you'd be perfect for it. And going from there. And so it's, don't be afraid to tell people. I think as we're exploring leaving student affairs, like we want to keep it a secret. Now is not the time to keep it a secret. You know, I hopefully that you can have those conversations with people even at your institution. There could be other jobs in other offices or other functional areas that might fit better. So I hope that you have a supportive network in order to do that. But even just outside that network, this is not the time to hold your cards close, because your next job is out there. You may not even know what it is, but somebody you know has a recommendation or has ideas of what you should be doing, and so you just need to utilize that network. Because I'd like to think my next job in fundraising, it's out there. I don't know what it is. I have no intention of leaving Delta Zeta. We all know that, and we talk about it on a regular basis. But building up a skill set that I have, so when that time does come, I will be ready. But it's you know, if I had a crystal ball, that'd be awesome. But like knowing that my next job in fundraising might not even be created yet because it's just not time, is a little weird. But I also know that's how it's going to work, is that hopefully somebody's going to say, hey, you know, you've got the skill set for this job, come work for us. So that's just utilize your network, utilize those relationships that we've already built.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So I want to ask you guys, if you could speak a little bit about the compensation when you moved from, and we were talking about this on the call before we got started about this compensation package versus just salary too, but would you be willing to speak a little bit about what it was like to go from higher ed to outside of higher ed student affairs? Were you compensated similarly? Did you have to take a pay cut? Did you get a pay increase? What was the, you know, the benefits package, and how did it relate to your work-life balance? You know, was it a better balance, that kind of thing? So Scott, if you're willing, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, my interview with Academy, the hiring manager straight up asked what I was making at the University of Utah, and I gave her exactly what it was. And she didn't flinch, and she seemed understanding, that she seemed to make it seem like that's what she could be looking at as well. And so, yeah, they matched my salary exactly, which was awesome. So I didn't have to take a dip in anything. When I reviewed the compensation package, the only difference was just the contribution to retirement, and the medical benefits were slightly different, had slightly higher co-pays, pharmacy things, stuff like that. Those are things you always got to review when you get those benefit packages to look over. There are some questions that I had. So Academy had an entire benefits department, so I was able to actually ask them a few questions, and then I was able to call United Healthcare some questions as well. When the time came that I got recruited, oh, that's a note I wanted to echo on Neil. Neil talked about how there are positions that may not be listed and stuff. That's the best part about moving out of higher ed, is unlike higher ed, private companies don't have to list positions if they don't want to. And if they want to create a position for you, then they can. If they just want to move someone into a role, they can. And so that's one thing to always be cognizant about. And so when the time came to recruit, that's when people, they were asking me, well, you know, what are you looking for? Things like that. And I had learned in the year and a half I think I'd been with Academy in the corporate world just how to negotiate better. And so by that point, I had been promoted into a leadership role at Academy, which raised my salary significantly. So I just asked just for a couple grand more, just to even me out to what I was making. And then I had mentioned that I had a honeymoon coming up. So they recruited me in July, and my honeymoon was in November. And so I told them what's going on. And so I was able to negotiate 2 weeks paid time that I did not have to use my retroactive vacation time. It was just 2 weeks, like this is it. And then I negotiated COBRA coverage as well. So Intercap paid for my COBRA and then gifted me those 2 weeks for my honeymoon. Our videographer who came to us with Academy as well, we were sitting together talking to Intercap's owner, our marketing director, and he had a baby on the way. And he had asked about paternity leave, and the owner mentioned, yeah, we have FMLA and stuff like that. And I very politely cut in and I mentioned, well, Academy doesn't do the FMLA. They just give mothers and fathers 2 weeks paid leave. And the owner just said, okay. And so I helped him negotiate 2 weeks paid paternity leave. So he didn't have to go through that FMLA mess. And so that's kind of like an awesome feeling where you're sitting there holding all the cards because they want you to come over. They're asking you what you expect. You don't want to get too greedy. I mean, I felt I was being fair asking for Cobra and maybe a little bit more money and honeymoon time. And I would have been fine if they told me I had to retroactively take 2 weeks of vacation. I wasn't asking for 2 free weeks paid. I was just telling them that I'm not going to be here for 2 weeks in November. And so one of a higher ed boss who I never once got along with at one of my old jobs over 10 years ago, even though I never got along with her, her advice is something that really lives with me to this day. And her whole thing was, don't ask, don't get. And I just live by that in everything. And so I'm always trying to ask for opportunities, ask for different things going on and stuff like that. And yeah, just keep don't ask, don't get in your mind, because that is what's really going to help you. One last thing I wanted to echo on Neil, like not being ready to leave higher ed, but having to and stuff like that. Yeah, I walked away from a 10-year legacy because I had this opportunity to be nationally recognized at different conferences and publish papers and do presentations for campus visitation. I had to leave all that behind. And I had mentioned this in higher ed. At the end of the day, you owe nobody at your current job nothing. Not anything at all. You have to do what's best for you, best for your mental health, best for your physical health. And if you're having mental breakdowns or if you're just stressed out and stuff, as much as you love your students or your coworkers or your environment and what you do, if it's not worth it, you don't owe anybody any of your time at all. You need to always take care of yourself and move forward from there.
Thank you for that, Scott. I appreciate that. Daniel, what would you have to say about the benefits, salary, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm in a little bit different situation, being that my position's predominantly commission-based, but as far as benefits, they're based on my production. And so there are tiers of benefits that we get based on how many years of service we have or how much business that we write. So the more business you write, the more handsomely you're rewarded financially, but also in your benefits become on a higher tier as well. The big thing that I'd say is do that negotiation and ask your questions as you're doing your job search. Put it all out on the table when you get to that point in your job search where you're trying to make that final decision. As Scott said, you don't get what you don't ask for. But similarly, you don't want to walk into a position blindsided or with questions still on the table either. It's easier to turn down a job offer than it is to leave a job once you're in it, based on both the relationships that you form, the reputation you're creating for yourself in the field. But by putting all the questions out there can really make all of the difference. And an example of that is that the first question that I asked in one of my last interviews is, am I going to have to call on my friends and family? Because for me, that idea was something that, you see this in a lot of the interviews, and there are a lot of companies that will literally say, put 200 names on a piece of paper, and I'm going to watch you call them in your first week. And I knew for a fact that's not what I wanted to do, but it took the interview in a totally different direction where they were able to reassure me that at this firm, that is not the way that they do business, that there are other ways to conduct the business, and that both sold me on Equitable Advisors, but it also gave my manager some ability to see how I thought and what was of value to me. every person's benefit package in the private world, there are different components that mean more, whether that's a financial meaning or whether that's an emotional meaning, and you've got to be able to name that for yourself.
Yeah, and that's such critical advice because we're all coming into different situations, different levels of privilege we have, and what we can accept and cannot accept as we make this transition. So thank you so much for that. All right, we'll go ahead and move on then. Neil.
Yeah, I would say the compensation is a huge thing. Kind of have an idea of what the industry you're looking at, what, kind of what your skill set and years of experience would bring to it. Somebody fortunately gave me that advice when I was negotiating at my very first fundraising job. I threw a number out, they accepted it, and it was significantly higher than what I was making in higher ed. But I'm glad I had that, because I think if I was not, when I met with HR and they're like, what's your salary expectations? I think I would have been a deer in headlights. And so I think just kind of have a number in mind, because most of these jobs aren't going to have a salary range posted or be able to look on their website at pay grades. And then also the benefit package. When I was lucky when I first left higher ed, that there was, the benefit package didn't really matter so much, as long as I had something that wasn't going to cost too much money. Because we know we don't get paid a lot in higher ed, so they can at least bump up the benefit package and vacation days. The health benefits are something that's a little bit more important to me. That the mid-30s have not been kind health-wise, and so just learning and navigating that. Not that it would have changed anything, but just kind of being aware of what your employer is going to cover or not going to cover, what the deductibles are and things like that. Like, that's just a part of life. And so just be ready to, and that's okay to ask those questions in the interview process, or call their healthcare provider to find out that the coverage that you need for yourself and for your family is what's going to be covered. And then also just be prepared for the vacation days to probably take a hit. I still have yet to find a company that I have gotten as much time off as we did in higher ed. And that's just the nature. So just figure out, like, maybe their holidays are different, or do they still close between Christmas and New Year's, or, just kind of look at it like it's not insurmountable. I also blessed that I have some flexibility as I'm full-time remote, pandemic or not. And so there's some opportunities that I can take advantage of with that. I literally can work from anywhere, but just to kind of be aware that I would have to say you're probably going to sacrifice vacation, but getting some of that work-life balance and other opportunities is going to make up for not having what seemed like unlimited amounts when we were in student affairs.
Great, thank you so much, Neil. All right, Josh, we'll ask you to close out this question.
Sure, absolutely. The advice is always begin the difficult questions after you get the offer in writing, right? And then, it's already clear they want you. So to the other point, if you don't ask, you don't get. I would really dig into the nuances, though. Insurance nuances are a big one. Everyone's trying to manage insurance costs on the employer side. So find out if maybe they use an HSA, which is a health savings account. Are they expecting that you're really contributing to the cost of your insurance, or are they using the HSA as a vehicle where they can put some money to bridge the gap between your out of pocket and their liability? So some companies will put money into an HSA to help you meet the deductible or partially meet the deductible. Sometimes that money comes in all in one lump sum. Sometimes that comes up in over 3 or 4 times a year, which might cause some cash flow issues if you have a lot of high healthcare expenses at the start of a period versus the end of a period. So there's a lot of nuances to look into when you're really evaluating the total compensation package. The other piece, which I don't think we find as much anymore, but office culture and workplace expectations. So one of the associations I work for, coming out of higher ed, I got paid like 33 grand a year. I was super happy for that. I was going to work like 35 hours a week, decent benefits, decent vacation. They wore suit and tie every day. So all of a sudden now I'm buying suits and ties. I'm dry cleaning. They go out to lunch as a team almost every day to a local steakhouse or some kind of place that is not like $4 a meal. And, before long, you're like, whoops, a few things I did not factor into the office culture of this organization. A lot of times in negotiating, you're more likely to be able to get some one-shot kind of things as opposed to guaranteed compensation. So a lot of times it's about percentages. So whatever your starting salary is, the the organization's always looking at, okay, over time, that's going to grow exponentially by percentages. So you might be able to get moving reimbursements. You might be able to negotiate in your second year some type of bonus-based compensation if you meet those goals and objectives. And they're really one-shots. So the organization is more likely to do a one-shot that's based on performance instead of being like stuck into having to pay you at a higher rate or something for what's being delivered. Vacation is held on the books as a liability, so organizations often are not excited about you banking a lot of vacation. So one of the things I shifted into, I always volunteered at a summer camp every year, and I shifted into them calling it volunteer hours. So it ended up not hitting the books as a liability, but they still gave me an extra week off of time to go do that activity. So there's some creative ways you can get time without it being a liability for the company. The other piece on compensation, the great thing about not-for-profits and associations, a lot like state institutions, they publish some of their salaries on their 990 or the tax form. So you can look at two websites. One's called ProPublica and another one's called GuideStar. And, you know, that's how I ended up earning $50,000 more than I was earning inside of my higher ed association, because I looked at the compensation structure inside of the 990. And instead of going in and asking for like 60 grand, I went in asking for 110, 120 grand salary. That's, you know, it's 50K based off of 990s and a $50 salary report, benchmarking report from ASAE's website. The other thing to look at in nonprofits and associations, there's usually like a percentage tier. So the CEO will typically make twice as much as your next highest paid executives. And then that level's like a VP, right? They may make, you know, CEO, and I'll use real numbers based off of an association that I was working at. CEO was making 250 to 300,000 in base compensation with bonuses, usually on a 3-year contract period, that pushed that up into $400,000 total compensation package. As a VP, I was working there, I was making 140K, right? Which is crazy. In my perspective, directors are making 90, and then managers or contributors are making like 40 to 50. So you tend to see, if you in the 990s, you can work backwards from that the CEO is going to make twice as much as your next level executive staff, and then it usually goes down from there in about halves or quarters. So that should give you a decent idea of what entry level might be making, or managers or directors inside of that structure. So whatever it stops at, you can kind of work backwards from there. You know, I'm never shy about talking about the real numbers that are out there because they're publicly available, and I think we do a disservice by not exposing what's going on in the world in that way.
Awesome. That was very helpful. Thank you so much. All right, panelists, we are actually over time right now because you all had so much fantastic information to share. So sorry to keep everyone a little bit late, but thank you so much to all of you for sharing your expertise. I hope we got to all of the questions that came in. And we have 2 more panels later today. So I hope to see y'all at the counseling and then career and life coach panels. Josh, Scott, Daniel, Neil, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you for the awesome job moderating.
Yep. Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks for putting these together.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.